Dr. Emmanuel Nchimbi has resigned. Dr. Nchimbi announced his resignation last night, that was Tuesday, citing a prior promise to step down whenever President Samia Suluhu Hassan desired political change. His departure follows growing media pressure and a controversial speech he made a month ago, which urged human rights groups to actively fight for a new national constitution. He has decided to retire from politics and public service. Let's speak about this further now with Maria Sarungi Tsehai, Tanzanian activist and media expert. Maria, thank you so much for speaking to us. Was this resignation received with shock or was it expected?
Thank you very much for having me. I think it was received with shock by many people because the impression many people had is that he will not resign. He will continue to fight within the government and within the party. Of course, there were indications already, as you rightfully pointed out, that they were at loggerheads with the president on a number of issues, including the fact that he has been trying to counter some of the violent factions within CCM and telling them that they need to back down, saying that activists and the opposition members are also Tanzanians. This was following a speech by Samia Suluhu where she said that those who plan protests are terrorists. So you can already see from public rhetorics that they were not in sync. But he did allude in many ways that he's up for a fight. And there was even a newspaper called Mwanahalisi that published the fact that he was asked to resign, but he refused to resign and he was ready to take on the fight. That newspaper that published that news was suspended for 6 months. So just, this was a very vicious fight within the ranks of CCM, although in public, we maybe saw just a small fraction of that.
Now, I just want to look at some of what I mentioned as what has been seen in some quarters as a build-up, and he himself saying that it is part of a promise that he'd already made to President Samia Suluhu Hassan that should the time come that she desires political change, that he will step down. When did this all begin? Is it a month ago or is it something that's been slow brewing?
Definitely, it has been something that has been slow brewing. And I think the fact is that there are two matters that happened, which even played into the fact of how he was nominated. So the way that he was nominated to become the vice presidential candidate within CCM happened unconventionally because the one who was the vice president in the first term of Samia Suluhu, Philip Mpango, was asked to step aside unexpectedly in January 2025 before the nomination process started, and they immediately nominated Emmanuel Nchimbi to be the vice president. He was at that time the Secretary General of CCM. So as you can see, this was hugely unconventional. It was highly criticized even by some CCM members publicly, like Ambassador Humphrey Polepole, who has been abducted and has not been seen since he started speaking out. So as you can see, it's been highly controversial. But as time went by, going toward the election, there were already a lot of information coming out that there was a split between the presidential and the vice presidential candidate, meaning Samia Suluhu and Emmanuel Nchimbi. So this has been brewing for a while. But just to make it clear, Emmanuel Nchimbi has always been a part of a faction within CCM who are the old guards, who are part of the old guards, not because of his age, but because of the fact that he has been a person who has been part of CCM since he has been very young. And he also speaks to a faction that has been more reconciliatory, trying to find ways to work together. So very quickly, there was a number of operations that happened with the government and the political party CCM, whereby they have been showing signs of violence. There have been cases of people being ejected from the party, and consistently Nchimbi has been speaking up. He also spoke up about a number of issues like the enforced disappearances or abductions that have been happening, and now the government has actually been able to put out a figures, putting it around 2,000 abductions that happened between 2021 to 2025, which is a lot. Out of that, most of the people have not been found. There have been many which have been politically motivated. So we are having a crisis, a very quiet and not so quite anymore crisis, which culminated in a very violent election. That is where I think the real split happened between them, because Nchimbi is a beneficiary of a presidency that came in through major violence. The government itself has admitted hundreds. Some of us activists have been following up and documenting thousands of people were killed. And these were not protesters. A lot of people were killed in their homes. Police went on a rampage for several days, and it's very well documented. So we are having right now a presidency or a government that has been in power with a lot of unaccountability, atrocities having happened. And Nchimbi has consistently, since sworn in, spoke out about the fact that accountability is needed, reconciliation is needed, and a new constitution, which you referred to. And I think that is definitely not in line with what Samia Suluhu has in mind. And you can clearly see that she is surrounded by a violent and extremist faction that is not at all pleased by any form of criticism or any form of misalignment with whatever the president says.
And Maria, there is a cost to that, something that you are very well aware of, which maybe some of our audience may not be. If you could just tell us a little bit more about your own personal experiences and how they speak to the reach of state power, particularly with regards to dissent, and just the concerns that have been raised in some quarters about Kenya being a place where that can happen. If you can just share a little bit about your experiences and the
Sure.
ability to speak out as a Tanzanian.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's very simple. As you rightfully said, I'm a person who has been in media and communication for many decades. And I've been well known as a communication expert, but also as a media owner in Tanzania. And what has happened is the government has been cracking down on freedom of expression and the freedom of media. It reached an extent whereby basically they shut down the media house that we were running, and we moved operations to Kenya. And what has happened is that despite the fact that I'm outside Tanzania, and one would expect quite relatively free to speak up, even if it's criticizing or agreeing or whatever it is, but dissent. And what has happened is that there was an operation to abduct me in Nairobi, and this has made it very scary because it means that the reach of state operators across the border is huge. And just to point out, it is not only me. There's been other cases. Actually, in Kenya recently, there was another case of another colleague and friend who was also in January this year. Again, there was an attempt to abduct him. Thankfully, again, it was the citizens who intervened in Kenya. So it is becoming clear that what is happening is that you're having cross-border repression happening, and these cross-border repression or abductions are happening because of a very porous border, but two, the situation even within Kenya has turned into a very dark situation whereby nobody is sure who is behind, who is working with who. We have been trying to follow up. We've been trying to get investigations into it. So it is becoming a very a web of dark operations that I think is becoming increasingly very risky for any Tanzanian outside the borders also to speak up in dissent. And that just shows you the extent of violent extremism that we are facing with CCM. It is with Samia Suluhu, of course, who really has sided with this faction within CCM. But after all, it is a political party. So it's the political party that has also approved kind of operations.
Just finally, what is the sense, particularly amongst Tanzanians and, of course, pundits of Tanzania's its trajectory? So there's a difference between political stability and democratic stability. So Dr. Nchimbi's actions, what do you think that they'll lead to, the former or the latter?
Oh, I think both. I mean, I think both for the political stability and democratic stability, which basically has been non-existent after a violent election last year and all the mass killings. I think what is happening, and this is very unfortunate, is that the resignation of Emmanuel Nchimbi has only reaffirmed to Tanzanians, to the mass, that there is something deeply wrong. Not because they were not aware, but now it's becoming increasingly aware that Samia Suluhu is not taking advice from anyone. What we would expect, that you have all these advisors, you have this party with these elders, people who advise her, and she's not taking advice. She's taking advice from a very small faction. This means that we are under a state capture. So the entire Tanzanian state, and also with that, ergo, the entire Tanzania has been captured by a small, violent extremist group. Those people who have been identified and seen as people who advise Samia Suluhu are not necessarily always in an advisory role. So one of the key people who keeps coming up and being mentioned by people who are in positions of power, even from opposition, is, for example, her son, Abdul Halim, who also showed up yesterday with Museveni talking about investments. So you have got people who are not in formal positions of power who have a lot of influence on Samia Suluhu. It's a very dangerous situation. What we're seeing is a relatively peaceful and democratic country sliding rapidly toward an autocracy, which probably is linked to a handful of people. And we have got a whole state machinery that is also being obedient to this shadowy figure. And we're seeing a lot of people within CCM in official positions like Nchimbi rejecting this kind of government. So we have a serious crisis. Nchimbi's resignation is a big political crisis. And I think that the entire region needs to be very cognizant about what happened. This is not a mere resignation.
Appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts with us. Maria Sarungi Tsehai, who's a Tanzanian activist and media expert, speaking to us about the resignation of Tanzania's Vice President, Dr. Nchimbi, and what the impact of that will be. And that brings us to 21 minutes past 7.
African Diaries with Teach Prates.
Loveline Basie is an entrepreneur, founder of leadership